Hey everybody, welcome back to From Guns to Keyboards. This is episode 12 of our podcast.
Episode 12.
Episode 12, we're gonna go over a brief news recap and then from there gonna get into the topic of today's episode, which is really focusing on how Dillon and I interact and understand the many comments that we have received from the medium universe and what that's like for us to get this sort of commentary from individuals that write back to us on the articles that we write on Medium and how we kind of understand that from our perspective.
Yeah, it's a break from our usual back and forth, just talking about current events, and instead kind of talking about a bit of how Michael and I are both writers on the website Medium. We both get a lot of comments on our stories, and we're just going to look at some of those comments and look for any overarching themes, and also just discuss, as Michael said, our interaction with the larger Mediumverse.
Yeah. And, right before we go into that, I'll give a brief news recap. I think the big headline this week is President Biden supposedly presenting an Israeli proposal to the entire world in which President Biden outlines a vision for ending the war, a permanent ceasefire that will include the release of all hostages, and unclear whether or not this outline will include the replacement of Hamas with foreign leadership. He stated in his speech that has now largely, especially in Israel, gone viral for its content, in which Israeli analysts are trying to understand what his intention was. He states on the one hand that his future vision for Gaza is one without Hamas in power, but the roadmap that he describes does not refer to the removal of Hamas from power at any stage of the roadmap. So it's not clear how exactly this proposal is going to play out and whether or not the Israelis were actually behind this proposal. But he claims that this is an Israeli proposal to bring about an end to the war, and this is making waves here in Israel and also in the Gaza Strip. In Israel, you have many Israelis that are largely supportive of the measure, and certain members of the governing coalition that have come out in support of this proposal exposed by President Biden. You have far-right members of the coalition government, including Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who have already said that they are opposed to this proposal. So it'll be interesting to see how this outline that was stated in Biden's speech will play out in terms of internal Israeli politics and the stability of Israel's governing coalition. Within Gaza, we're seeing mixed signals. Some days we're getting reports that Hamas is largely positive about this proposal. Other days we're getting reports that Hamas is going to reject the proposal. It's unclear how all this is going to play out, but this is really the big headline from this week, this quote-unquote Israeli proposal that was revealed to the world by President Biden. In addition to that, we also have the other big headline from this week, which is all the drama going on in the north, where both Israel and Hezbollah are exchanging fire in a much more escalated fashion than what we've seen in previous weeks. And the rhetoric that we're seeing regarding this war has reached a much higher level of escalation than we've seen in previous weeks. Hezbollah has attacked Israel's north in a much more significant way and caused forest fires throughout much of Israel's north. Israel is responding with very significant strikes deep into Lebanese territory, causing both sides to escalate further and further and further into a mutual tit for tat. The rhetoric on the Israeli side is starting to talk a lot more openly about the prospect for war. The head of Israel's Northern Command, of the IDF Northern Command, stated quite clearly today that the army is ready for a full-out war against Hezbollah. War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz referred recently to the potential for war with Hezbollah and basically gave a deadline where he said that until September 1st, the return back to school for Israelis, for Israeli kids, this war is either going to happen, and if not, the only thing that will prevent it from happening is a diplomatic solution with Hezbollah in the north. So we do have a deadline from a member of Israel's governing coalition that I'm sure is shared by other members of the coalition. That's in terms of Lebanon.
It's a story that has caused no lack of anxiety to yours truly, and I'm sure to Michael as well.
Yeah. For those listeners who don't know, I'm getting married in 4 or 5 days. I forgot the exact
Mazal
time
tov.
from today until the big day. We got 5 days until the wedding. And my number one request from the Israeli government, if a war will break out with Hezbollah, to at least allow Dillon and I to celebrate my big day next week, go out, celebrate, get married, and then afterwards, whole other story.
My request
Much more-
would be
much more
no
available
war, but
Much more available for war.
if there has to be a war because the powers that be decide there must be, then yes, please let it be after the wedding.
I'm also not down for war, but if there's gonna be a war, then have it happen after the wedding,
Yeah.
after June 11th, and we'll take it from there.
I'm sure it'll be fine. I had my wedding during COVID, and our biggest request was that we didn't have a massive closure, and we got that request. And I think I hope that your guys' luck will follow ours. I believe it will. But yeah, it's a tense time, definitely, with these two fronts. I guess I think you mentioned the two major news issues, both Gaza and the concern for the ceasefire proposal, and obviously the North. And it's a bit of a wait and see kind of situation on both sides right now. But I think we've had a lot of wait and see situations. You know,
Right.
we think about the Iranian attacks and various other, the Rafah invasion, and both times we were spared. At least you and me personally were spared any major or devastating results from it. And I hope that our luck will continue to hold, basically.
Amen, amen.
All right. In the meantime, let's get down to it. So, yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, Michael and I, we write on Medium. Give us a follow. Give us a read if you're interested. We like to write each other about very different things. I tend to have my focus be on counterinsurgency and Israeli counterinsurgency, which is becoming a word that was not used in Israeli military doctrine until very recently. With a more recent one, I think I posted about a month ago, which was a book review on Bibi Netanyahu's book, which is titled Bibi. So if you want to know my thoughts on that or the counterinsurgency, give that a read. Michael tends to post... why don't you describe, actually? So,
Yeah, I think a lot of my posts tend to be analyses of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from my perspective. I obviously do have a pro-Israel perspective on the conflict, and that perspective does come out in the articles that I write. There are specific articles that I write that are very much advocating for Israel or a strong U.S.-Israel relationship or supporting Israeli policy one way or another, but the vast majority of the articles that I write are not focused on that. They're more so focused on, at least from my perspective, analyzing the different events that we're seeing play out in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or specifically in the Israel-Hamas conflict, with a perspective that is, of course, by nature biased from the opinion that I have on this conflict, which is much more pro-Israel. But the analyses themselves are not designed to be these pro-Israel documents or pro-Israel articles. They're very much designed to kind of give perspective on different things, whether it's certain battles that took place in the war, or whether it's certain events that took place during the course of the war, and giving my perspective and analyzing the consequences of these events. So that's largely the focus of the articles that I write on.
This will be very important to keep in mind, too, once we get to Michael's articles, because as we can see, the commenters tend to be very negative, I would say. A lot of, I believe you have gotten some serious accusations from quite a lot of people who've commented.
I have to say, this is the first time in my life that I have been accused of genocide and war crimes, and I have been informed by the Mediumverse that it is only a matter of time before I am tried by an international tribunal, and have been met with confusion as to why I am so open about my support for war crimes, when the obvious result from the Medium Universe's perspective is that I will inevitably be tried by the ICC or some sort of parallel body to the ICC. I have to say that these criticisms are both rough and somewhat complimentary, because they go so deep into the articles that I write and so deep into me as a person. And I think what a lot of these people miss is I'm just kind of a regular guy that's sharing my opinions from the experiences that I have and from my understanding of the situation. And I think they kind of, the medium verse, especially the anti-Israel medium verse, which is much of the medium verse that I counter, take this to a whole another level in terms of their take on my opinions.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if the ICC goes after a low-ranking intelligence soldier, but I mean, you never know. Anything can happen.
Anything can happen. If I'm next in the food chain after Bibi Netanyahu.
Yeah,
of course.
Bibi, then Michael. I think is the order.
Michael Harris, host of From Guns to Keyboards, is definitely next in line.
Yep. I mean, if these comments are to be believed, that is 100% true. All right, we'll save those ones for part 2. Part 1, we're gonna focus on Dillon and his articles. So the first one. There's 2 articles we're gonna talk about. The first one is the IDF discipline problem goes beyond the battlefield. This was actually a sort of a carry-on to a previous episode we had when we asked the question of, is the IDF a moral army? And in it, basically, if we want to just break it down simply, I think you had said you believe, yes, the IDF is a moral army because of its intent. I had said, no, it's not a moral army because of the results. Basically, what I was saying is that the lack of enforced discipline amongst IDF troops is harming the war effort. This was the long and short of this article. And as a result, we'll take a peek at the comments. So the comments tend to be, I noticed, a little bit reactionary. A lot of people were actually pro-Israel, interestingly enough. Whereas you get a lot of the anti-Israel comments. I actually got quite a few pro-Israel comments, which I think just speaks to people having a more negative, visceral reaction. I think we've known with a long time with social media that if you present something that somebody disagrees with, they're more likely to interact with it versus something somebody agrees with. This seems to be the situation for both of us. I'm obviously much more critical of Israel and its behavior in this war than Michael is. And so, okay, comment number 1. It's from a guy named Orion. He says, note that Hamas doesn't have to worry about a discipline problem. People cheer when they kill civilians. And yes, that certainly is true. I disagree that Hamas doesn't necessarily have to worry about a discipline problem. Hamas, to an extent, obviously, as an insurgent group, they need to have some form of hierarchy and discipline and things like that. They can't just have guys running around doing their own thing as individuals, because they would get wiped out by the IDF. Yeah, they do kill civilians, and a lot of people cheer. There's certainly no doubt about that either. And what this person seemed to me was sort of expressing the frustration when battling an insurgent group like Hamas, who Hamas has stated very clearly that they are not concerned with civilian deaths. They're not concerned with Palestinian civilian deaths. For them, their goal is to bring about the destruction of Israel. I mean, it depends which charter you believe that they're following. If you believe in the 1988 charter, if you believe in the 2017 charter, it depends on which one you think that they're following more of. Either they want the 67 borders or they want all of Israel. That either way, for them, that's their only goal. They don't really follow by the rules of war. They don't really feel like they need to. They're able to purchase weapons covertly that are being smuggled in from Iran via Egypt and likely via other methods as well. So for them, they don't really have to follow any sort of rules of war in the way that a Western-aligned country like Israel has to. And it's incredibly frustrating. It's one of the biggest challenges of any counterinsurgency, essentially, is that because this isn't, Alexander in Afghanistan, where we can slaughter 100,000 Afghan tribesmen as a show of basically terror in order to stop an insurgency in its tracks, we as a result are forced to abide by the rules of war. I would argue that that's not a bad thing by any means. It's a sign of progression with humanity, but it does leave, obviously, insurgent armies very limited. By the way, the debate of whether state-sponsored terrorism is a legitimate response to an insurgency is actually hotly debated within Western academia and Western military channels. Currently, the prevailing belief is that no, it is not acceptable, but from a purely historical perspective, it's incredibly effective. And I think for the Israelis, who I say Western aligned because, yes, we are very much in that Western bloc of nations in the world, but we tend to look at ourselves as having mitigating circumstances. And for us, this idea of deterrence via state terror has been incredibly effective in the past, and we tend to, I think, want to promote its usage in this war. Again, I'm not saying it's genocide or anything like that, but I'm saying that for the Israelis, the idea of civilian deaths are much more palatable to the Israelis, I would say, in this particular war than they were to, say, the Americans in Iraq, Afghanistan. Michael, what do you think about what I just said? Because that's a very controversial statement.
Very controversial statement. I guess my question for you, before I quite expectedly push back on this statement, is how do you define state-sponsored terrorism?
So I define it more as an act of terror, which the state itself is promoting. So anything that's going to induce fear in a population or to get them to behave in a way that you want.
I don't think Israel is actively engaging in state-sponsored terrorism. I think that obviously there is a feeling of terror amongst quite a few residents of the Gaza Strip, and it's very understandable considering the situation that they're in the greater context of this war. But I don't think Israel is coming with a strategy of let's go about and cause terror throughout the Gaza Strip. And again, it's not, that opinion that I'm stating now is not from a desire to, cover up or give credit to Israel or just to be unabashedly pro-Israel. I genuinely don't think that that's the Israeli take here. I think that at least my read of the situation is that Israel is very focused on going after Hamas, but is doing so in a very aggressive way, in a way that it hasn't done so in the past. It's allowing the harnesses to kind of be very relaxed in that sense. And the end result is, as Israel goes after Hamas, inevitably an enormous amount of civilians have been killed in this war, and the feeling of terror is quite present amongst many of the residents of the Gaza Strip. I think that is the end result, but I don't think that's the intent of the Israeli government. I don't think the Israeli government is looking to cause terror amongst the civilians of the Gaza Strip. I also don't see what they would particularly gain from this feeling of terror.
So honestly, I mean, when the Israelis talk about deterrence, what is deterrence at the end of the day? What is a 10-for-1 ratio in terms of death that Israel has been generally practicing for the past 20 years, essentially? It's this idea of, if you attack us, be afraid, because we're coming for you, and we're going to kill 10 people for every person you killed for us. Deterrence is a form of deterrence, this idea of terror and understanding that. I mean, recently, I believe it was Bezalel Smotrich made a comment in response to the shootings that have been taking place in northern, or not even northern, central Israel near Netanya, where he threatened the refugee camp in the West Bank by saying that if you don't stop these shootings, we're going to turn your camp into the next Gaza. That is a form of state-sponsored terror. That is a political form of terror to say, see what we're doing in Gaza? This can be repeated anywhere. And if you don't behave in the way we want you to, this is going to happen to you.
Factually speaking, that is what the finance minister said. But again, there's a difference between statements stated by a radical member of Israel's government.
But he's the finance minister. He's not an outlying coalition member. He's a central member of the government.
Absolutely. He's a senior and central member of the government. You're 100% right. He is not a member of Israel's war cabinet. He does not make decisions specifically related to the war the way the war cabinet does. He is a member of the security cabinet, so he does have some degree of influence. And I have not seen these opinions that can quite fairly be described as radical and unacceptable opinions being accepted by the Israeli security cabinet and by the Israeli war cabinet. So while I think it's fair to criticize the finance minister for his opinions, I think it would be a stretch to take these opinions that are stated by Bezalel Smotrich and put it on the Israeli government and saying, this is proof that the Israeli government is interested in carrying out state-sponsored terror. I think that
at the same time, I think we see just how much influence and control they really have over the coalition. And I think we have to ask ourselves, when you say, okay, these are radical statements, radical to whom? Radical to Americans? Absolutely. Like radical to you and me? Definitely. Radical to the Israeli populace at large? I'm not so sure, to be honest with you. I'm not so sure that many Israelis would really shed too many tears over Gaza turning into a parking lot, as Israelis are fond of saying, or certain Palestinian-controlled areas in the West Bank being turned into complete desolate and destroyed areas.
I think that it's fair enough, and definitely, just like the Palestinian population has clear opinions about the way in which Hamas ought to deal with Israelis, there are opinions.
Yeah, but I'm not interested in how the
Israeli government should deal with.
I'm less concerned with how the
Gaza.
Palestinians think, because yes, we know the Palestinians are extremely radical bunch as well. At the end of the day, though, you and I are Israelis. We serve in the IDF, and I think we have responsibility more to directing Israeli opinion than we do directing Palestinian opinion.
I agree, but I want to take you back to the statement that you said regarding which we're having this discussion. The statement is not, do Israeli civilians have an opinion that supports state-sponsored terror? That's a whole other conversation. The conversation that we're having now is whether or not the Israeli government is carrying out an active policy of state-sponsored terror. So I'm not trying to say that much of the Israeli population does or does not want to kill Palestinian civilians. I think that's a separate conversation that we definitely have certain moral responsibility to discuss. I agree with you. I think you're right. But on the specific question that we originally mentioned, is the Israeli government actively carrying out state-sponsored terrorism? I do not see the direct connection between that and the opinion of the Israeli public. I think these are two separate issues that need to be discussed. And I think that we need to assess the situation based on the policy and practice. And the policy and practice does not indicate state-sponsored terrorism.
And I would actually say that in Gaza, for the most part, it's tough to say. I think you're right. It's tougher for me to make a firm and assertive opinion on Gaza at this point. Perhaps other than the Israeli government's initial reluctancy to allow aid into Gaza, which did change, although it's very much fluctuating in many ways. Whether or not there's an actual policy, I think assumingly will be revealed at some point during the South Africa case, and I believe it's the ICC, right? The ICC?
And the ICJ.
Is the ICJ? Okay, and the ICJ. But in terms of state-sponsored terrorism, I mean, I think we can actually look at, for instance, arbitrary arrests. If we want to bring it back to the greater conflict as a whole, arbitrary arrests in the West Bank, arbitrary raids, soldiers, oftentimes, it's self-reported in many ways, doing things like throwing flashbangs in the middle of Palestinian hamlets in the middle of the night just to keep them awake, kind of thing. These are very much IDF policies that do have a sign-off from a senior commanding officer that are very much about terrorizing the Palestinians into compliance with the Israeli mandate within the West Bank. Whether or not Israel is intentionally targeting civilians in Gaza as a way of spreading mass hysteria and mass fear, I don't think that's the case, but what I think Israel is trying to do is through a form of deterrence by basically saying we're not really concerned about civilian deaths, whether or not they happen collaterally or not. If we assume that there's a target here, we're going to bomb it regardless of what's going on inside. We want you guys to remember this because this is a result of Hamas, and this is something you guys should keep in mind anytime you attack Israelis. That, I think, is a form of psychological terror, and I think that could very much fit within the definition of state-sponsored terror.
So I guess first of all, I think it's fascinating that this one comment that you got on Medium, all in all, 2 short sentences.
Very benign comment, yeah, that has erupted into this conversation.
Yeah, note that Hamas doesn't have to worry about a discipline problem. People cheer when they kill civilians. Very benign, very simple comment brought about this conversation. And I want to bring this back to the topic of our podcast.
I was also saying we should probably move on a bit as well, yeah.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about other comments that you got, other things that really stroke your interest, things that...
So this is for me what really like piques my interest in a lot of these comments, because a lot of these comments are kind of what I mentioned to you just a minute ago. The hiding behind Hamas and Hezbollah and the whataboutisms that a lot of Israeli supporters tend to make. I have no patience for those comments. You know, there's a comment right after this is, how about asking whether Hamas, Hezbollah, their benefactors in Iran have discipline problems? Nah, why bother, right? Another person says, another high-minded armchair quarterback position. China and Russia don't want Israel to exist. Iranian comments on genocide. Again, nothing really saying, hey, listen, I think the IDF is an incredibly disciplined army because of X, Y, and Z, but rather trying to move the onus of the conversation back to, well, what about these people? What about the Russians? What about the Palestinians? What about this? What about that? And for me, I have zero patience for that. And this is just a little bit about myself. I view myself as an Israeli. I view myself as a veteran of the IDF. I don't believe, with that being a part of my identity, that I'm going to influence any Palestinian one way or another. But I do believe I can make at least a small impact on Israeli society. I believe I have at least enough authority, even as an immigrant, as a foreigner, as someone who prefers to speak English in his day-to-day life, whose Hebrew is still a little bit broken, that I can still make it. I have enough of authority still to make enough of an impact on Israeli society. And so, to be honest, when people start doing these whataboutisms, I lose my patience a little bit.
I think what's interesting is that these whataboutisms, as you described it, not only talk about Iran and Hezbollah, they also bring it back to you personally, at least some of them, where they, for example, this one specific comment that you mentioned, another high-minded armchair quarterback position.
This one really made me laugh when I read that, because I obviously, and by the way, when I'm on Medium, just so you guys know, I believe in the kill 'em with kindness theory. I always keep things very polite, and I believe I commented here. I'll actually read my comment, where I said, so the guy calls himself Rogue 4Gay, with the number 4, not FOR. So I said, thank you for your comment expressing your passionate opinions on this issue. You may be surprised to know that I'm actually a veteran of this war. I fought in the IDF's Yalom Special Forces unit in both the initial invasion of northern Gaza and later in Khan Yunis. Thus, my opinions, while certainly written from the comfort of my living room couch, are also based around lived experiences as well. Yeah, it just made me laugh, honestly. I see where he's going. He's like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just some dumbass, whatever, like with zero connection, zero understanding. This also, in my opinion, goes back to, I think, what a lot of people... And again, by the way, these are just my opinions. I want to make this very clear. There are hundreds of thousands of people who fought in this war and also saw, far more intense fighting than I did, and very likely have a complete opposite opinion of me. I want to make clear I do not represent the opinions of IDF fighters. I don't represent the opinions of even other guys on my team in Yalom. I represent my opinion. This is just me and my personal opinions based on just what I saw. But that being said, obviously I do see a lot of Israelis, when they see people disagreeing with them, the assumption is that they're ignorant or ill-informed. And this is just something I kind of see within Israeli society as well. And again, I think that's far from the truth for a lot of people. Some people, of course, are very ignorant and ill-informed, but a lot of people do come from a basis of knowledge and understanding of at least a basic outline of this conflict, and are entitled to their opinion, should be treated with respect for their opinion. That's my personal take on it.
Yeah.
Don't think it's too controversial to say that, but...
Not at all. Not at all. I think that everybody has their own opinion, and I think that as much as it's amusing to see these comments on Medium, at least in my opinion, I think it's a little bit sad that people bring it to a personal kind of take, where
it's a personal war. For many people, Israel-Palestine it touches on feelings of identity and morality, and it's incredibly personal. I can totally understand. Look, when you and I started this podcast, I didn't expect us to have a 5.0. This is not an uncontroversial topic by any means. This is incredibly controversial. You and I come with our opinions, and a lot of people are going to disagree with it, and they're going to want us to know that we're wrong and don't listen to these guys and they're stupid and da-da-da-da-da. Totally fine.
Right.
I completely understand that. I completely get it. And when people are heated and emotional, and they tend to turn things into personal attacks, and I think we'll definitely see that, especially on some of your articles as well, with a lot of personal attacks on that one. That's again another hint, another trailer of what we got waiting. All right, I think we'll move on to the second article I want to talk about, the 5 objectives for a successful Israeli counterinsurgency. This is probably one of the most successful Medium articles I've written in recently, but basically I outlined, I believe that the issue with the Israeli military is that the Israeli military has never fought in a counterinsurgency before. Israeli military is good at two types of warfare, which is conventional warfare that we all know, two armies facing against each other. The Israelis were able to, obviously, in the Six-Day War, defeat the combined armies of Egypt and Syria and Jordan within 6 days, which is an unbelievable military feat. And in the 1973 war, despite suffering major setbacks during the initial invasion, were able to recover and almost reach the capitals of both Egypt and Syria by the time the war ended, which I believe took 3 weeks. The only reason they didn't is because the United States demanded the Israelis stop because the Russians were threatening to involve themselves in the war, and that might have ended in World War III, essentially. So again, in terms of conventional warfare, the Israelis are incredibly successful. And then the second type of warfare I mentioned, obviously, is containment, which is how Israel has been fighting the Palestinian insurgency ever since. This idea of, well, we can't form a political solution with them because they want the destruction of Israel, and obviously there's no negotiating with that, so the best we can do is to just try and contain them, do things like counterintelligence assessments, special forces raids, which has since then evolved, I think, primarily under the Netanyahu administrations, into full-out warfare and what the Israelis call mowing the lawn, which is every few years, rocket attacks, soldiers, tanks, in order to quell Palestinian violence and then to resume the status quo. So what I said was the objectives for a successful Israeli counterinsurgency, kind of laid out how I think the Israelis should switch gears and switch strategies into a counterinsurgency. I was very heartened because I think about a week after I wrote this, you sent me an article by David Petraeus, who was in 2006 became commander of Allied forces in Iraq and later Afghanistan, and basically wrote the book in the U.S. military about counterinsurgency, and he agreed with me. And so, David Petraeus, if you're listening to this, let's talk. That would be awesome. But so anyway, so one thing I mentioned, there is a particular verbiage I use in this one where I mention propaganda, and when I say propaganda, I spoke about how the world is interpreting the war and how Israel is presenting the war. Because up until recently, and even as recent as the initial Rafah invasion, Israel has been presenting this war to other Israelis, showing them, hey, you don't have to be afraid anymore. Look at how big and strong and powerful we are. We're blowing up buildings. We're going inside their homes. We're taking their shit if we want. We're doing what we want, basically. We're the people in charge now. You can sleep safe at night. It's completely understandable. As someone who lived in Israel during October 7th, I completely understand why the IDF is doing what they're doing, why soldiers are doing what they're doing. But unfortunately, for the rest of the world who didn't live through that in the perspective that you and I did, they sort of see Israel now as these aggressive, heartless brutes brutalizing, terrorizing Palestinians. And this is very much colored their perception of the war. The Palestinians, on the flip side, are sending out photos of dead, sick, injured children, of Palestinian doctors mourning over the deaths of their families. It's caused quite, obviously it stirs the heartstrings, and it causes quite a lot of global sympathy, as we've seen. And my argument when I said propaganda was that rather than do this, Israel needs to create a military policy and military strategy that would allow them, that would basically facilitate organically the release of photos that would change the tone of this war. Things like setting up field hospitals, distributing food, doing something as simple as distributing candy to children even. Is that going to win the war? Absolutely not. But if you change the tone of this war, and if you change the policy of how you would ask soldiers to interact with them, if you facilitate the ability for soldiers to interact with Palestinian children to the extent they're able to hand out candy, and you film that and you put it online, you have a member of the Israeli propaganda, the IDF propaganda arm doing that, that's going to change the way the world views this war. The question is that something that Israelis want to see?
What did the Mediumverse have to say to you about that?
The Mediumverse said that basically they interpreted propaganda as only the images, not the strategy, which might have been my fault. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. We have people saying, so this is a woman, Farida Haque, who will appear again when we get over to Michael. She's quite active on Medium, very anti-Israel, very pro-Palestinian. She speaks of these IDF as, here's her words, not mine, demon hordes, mindless brutes, post videos of IDF dancing around piles of dead baby, shoot to kill starving kids, journalists targeted and killed, all infrastructure in Gaza has been blown to smithereens systematically. So
Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just had one question for you.
Yeah.
When did you learn that you were a demon horde, and did you only hear about this the first time when Farida informed you?
This was the first time. I mean, I'd always kind of suspected, but this was the first time it had been laid out to me, and it clicked. But no, I have to be honest with you, and I do try and take people very seriously. Again, when they post and treat them with respect. I did Google for IDF dancing around piles of dead bodies. I didn't find anything. Farida, if you're listening, feel free to. I know it would be very difficult, but if that video exists, let me know.
And if you have any pictures of demon hordes, we would love to see.
And any demon hordes would also be fantastic too, because I don't think that video exists. I believe this is kind of another example of being sort of in your own bubble kind of thing. And you know, at the end of the day, kudos to her. I will give her credit for even clicking on this article. Because I can't imagine this was something that she would, going into it, assume she would agree with even. But she did, and she even quoted me in her response. So I'm guessing she read through some of it, at least like half of it. So kudos to you, Farida, despite your characterization, which I believe is interesting. She actually commented twice. Can't believe I wasted time. This is number 2. Can't believe I wasted time skimming over this bizarre piece of art. Okay, so I take that back. She just skimmed it, but we'll forgive her. There are a couple other interesting ones as well. So some people actually kind of took the opportunity to kind of suggest what they believe would be a solution to the Israeli-Gaza or Israeli-Palestinian crisis, which is, all right, so there's some guy, Cyberward, who says, here's a really off-the-wall suggestion, federal state. Because I live in Canada, and it has sort of worked for 140 years. Far from perfectly, but it has demonstrated it's capable of evolution. The indigenous people are recovering more and more of their sovereignty, and utopianly, is that a word, utopianly?
I guess from now on,
it's Cyberword says it is.
It's the new normalcy, a new word that has been added to the dictionary.
I guess so.
This time by Cyberword.
By Cyberword, yeah, word, W-Y-R-D. Might even become provinces one day. Anglophones and Francophones live side by side, and the casualties from inter-ethnic conflict between them can be counted on the fingers of one hand. Canadian federal state? Thoughts?
Just like Yugoslavia, these things work out perfectly. There's no precedent for large multi-ethnic states to fall apart.
Well said, sir. Well said. This guy I appreciate. Dan O, wherever you are, Dan O, says, Dillon, despite the harsh words thrown at you here, I commend your attempts at finding a path forward. Kudos. Thanks, Dan. I do appreciate that. This guy, okay, Taminad Crittenden. Taminad, I'm so sorry. I undoubtedly screwed up your name. But Taminad says, what I would recommend doing is focusing on the educational system. Israel should take a small part of Gaza and put in charge Palestinians who were educated in Israeli institutions. Israel should control the educational system in that small area and recruit future leaders only from Palestinians raised in this Israeli-controlled educational system. Am I the only one getting 1982 vibes here, or like what? Where are your thoughts?
I don't think it's 1982 in what sense? In sense of the.
It seems a little dystopian.
Well, you're saying 1984, like the.
Did I say 1982? Yeah,
1984.
Wow. 1984 vibes. Yeah.
When you said 1982, I thought you were referring to the Israel conflict.
Like...
So yeah, it is a bit Big Brother in that sense of, you know, the desire by Taminad Crittenden to basically take over the Palestinian education system. But I think it's a common opinion shared by many in the international community where the focus is kind of on how can the endless cycles of violence be broken without breaking the way in which hate is kind of injected into the educational system. And I think that this is a part of a greater problem that we, as a part of the West, as you described it yourself, deal with when we carry out counterinsurgencies in much of the Middle East and the greater world, when we fight wars against disparate guerrilla groups in different countries. We're kind of faced with this dilemma where we come as the quote-unquote democratic state that are looking to defend our values and what's important to us, but on the other hand, we inevitably get drawn into situations where we want to impose our values and what's important to us on the indigenous population of that group, of that area, and inevitably this kind of puts us into this weird circle in which we're in the desire to promote democracy, we're ironically kind of bringing about this big brother anti-democratic sort of
it
reality.
Naturally creates pushback. People view democracy as the evil oppressor because they're forcing that change amongst people,
right,
rather than empowering. I would say empowering internal change. I do understand what Tamina's coming from is this idea, and this is actually something that my best friend General David Petraeus mentioned as well, which is when you're carrying out a counterinsurgency, one of the best things to do is to create walled off, segregated communities of people for whom you can then monitor and work with, essentially. So if you're attempting to rebuild a neighborhood, one of the first things you want to do is first wall off that neighborhood, take a sense of everybody inside, and from there you can start to rebuild and reorganize institutions. Things like having schools, things like having government buildings, power, water, gas, food, into areas of people who, for the most part, are not interested, or not the most part, but who are not interested in fighting you. One thing with Israel as well is that Israel has an incredible biometrics technology, so this would actually be quite easy for the Israelis to do, and to create these sort of walled-off communities and begin the rebuilding process within them. To basically say, okay, if you want to live in here, obviously no weapons, you're required an Israeli government-issued biometric ID card, and with this, you will be given your daily rations, you can enter into schools, you can enter into work facilities, you can do these things, we're going to economically build you up. The idea being that this sort of economic and social incentives will then stop you from taking up arms and fighting in an insurgency against the Israelis. This is a long way of saying that I think that's kind of where Tamina was coming from, but he kind of took it a step forward as turning this into a fully Israeli-controlled zone, which would then produce future leaders of the Palestinian state. Obviously, I don't think people who are removed from Palestinian culture would make very good leaders within a wider Palestinian government for a multitude of reasons. I also just think that Israelis don't have the desire or the want to essentially govern these semi-autonomous regions indefinitely for generations. But that being said, I appreciate the creativity. I love out-of-the-box thinking. But Tamina, in the comments too, we had a very long thread, and I stand by what I said. I'm gonna have to just agree to disagree with you.
And we're waiting to hear whether it's Taminid or Taminad.
Yeah, if you can write phonetically your name for us, that would be awesome, because I do feel bad. All right, let's move on. Let's get to Michael. All right.
Yeah, so I think the first article that I want to touch on is what Israel's successful raid in Rafiah taught us all.
Before we begin with this, can I just say how disappointed I am in you for even writing this article?
Please, share your disappointment, Dylan. Sure.
We had a podcast episode where you said Israel had a successful raid in Rafiah, and I said, Michael, let's not jump to conclusions. The raid is still ongoing. And next day you write this article. Do you just not listen to a word that comes out of my mouth? What's happening, dude?
Well, listen. I guess the one thing I have to say about that is, if we didn't jump to conclusions and didn't make statements based on our understanding of the situation or our gut instinct about things that are actively happening in the news that may change dramatically from one day to another, then we wouldn't be able to make this wonderful podcast that we're doing right now and write the articles that we're writing on Medium. I agree with you. obviously situations can change, and who knows what will happen in Rafiah tomorrow, who knows what will happen a week from now, and God knows what will happen a month from now. But
Can I make it?
I think it's fair, at least from what we've seen already, to make an assessment of what's already happened without discussing the future necessarily.
Can I maybe make a slight tweak
Always.
to this one? I think that calling it a raid suggests, because the raid is, I mean, it's the raid, the operation, the conquest, whatever you want to call it, it's still ongoing. But the fact that I think what the successful initial initial insertion into Rafiah was successful. The fact that the Israelis were able to evacuate as many people as they did, and were able to enter Rafiah without receiving condemnation by the United States, direct condemnation by the United States government. That was the successful part, I think, and I think that's kind of the message you were trying to give in this article.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I can, to kind of break it down, in this article that I wrote, What Israel's Successful Raid in Rafiah Taught Us All, obviously, and I mentioned this earlier, I have a clear pro-Israel perspective. I am very supportive of Israel. Like Dillon, I actively do reserve duty in the Israeli army, and I'm very supportive of the ongoing war and believe that Israel needs to do what it has to do in order to destroy Hamas's military and governing capability in the Gaza Strip. That being said, this article was not intended to be a particularly pro-Israel article. It was intended to be an analysis, objectively, of the Israeli raid in Rafiah, which kind of slowly developed in recent days into something of a full-on invasion, but at least in the beginning started out as a limited raid in eastern Rafiah. And I was kind of giving my opinion on this raid and complimenting its many successful attributes. And I think that it really wasn't intended to be a overly pro-Israel article, even though obviously the author, yours truly, has a very pro-Israel opinion on the subject matter. I've said in the past, and for the sake of comparison, I think it's fair to bring up that, when we speak about Hamas carrying out what it did on October 7th, as immoral as that was and terrible as that was, I will go on record, and I've said it before, as saying that from a pure military strategic perspective, Hamas's raid on October 7th was incredibly successful, and from Hamas's perspective, allowed it to achieve an enormous amount of goals that it previously was unable to achieve. And obviously, that's not a pro-Hamas statement. I don't support Hamas. I actively am a part of an army that is looking to destroy Hamas. It's just an objective look at the situation, seeing how specific military operations on the ground have certain benefits for the country that carries it out, or for the organization like Hamas that carries it out, and certain drawbacks for that specific group. So this article, like I said, clearly there's a pro-Israel angle to it, but my intention was really just to focus on the raid itself and give a personal opinion of the raid. And largely, I discussed the many aspects of the raid that, in my opinion, are positive. You discussed one of them, the lack of American opposition, or public opposition at least, to the raid in Rafiah, Israel's ability to quite easily take over 70% of the Philadelphia corridor without facing significant opposition from Hamas, Israel's ability to move into eastern Rafiah and create and deepen its buffer zone from the Palestinian militants operating in eastern Rafiah. There's a lot of different angles from this, from an international diplomatic angle and from a military angle, that I think were very successful. You mentioned earlier the evacuation. The quote-unquote military experts of Rafiah said that it will take no shorter than 4 months for Israel to evacuate Rafiah to the degree that it did. In a very short amount of time, almost 1 million Palestinians left Rafiah and moved north. I think the total time it took was 2 to 3 weeks, completely beating all the expectations of international experts. So anyway, I'm going to
just real quick, and then we'll go right in the comments. I also want to caution us on how we view that as like a success by the Israeli side, because it's not like Israelis were leading Palestinians to effective areas. They're basically dropping flyers and sending text messages, just threatening people, being like, if you don't leave, you're probably going to die. And at the end of the day, too, look, shortly, I think a week after this article was written, we had, there was the explosion that took out, I think, 2 Hamas commanders in the West Bank, in Rafiah, that also resulted in the deaths of 45 Palestinians who burnt alive, which is under investigation. It's not totally clear that it was a direct it was a direct result, obviously, of Israeli bombing, but that Israel didn't directly target them.
Yeah, no, look, obviously, there were specific cases. This, the incident that you mentioned, Prime Minister Netanyahu went on record apologizing on behalf of the Israelis and at least stating that this was a mistake that will be investigated. So clearly, specific events will happen. But I think that actually the incident that we saw in Rafiah, in which a significant number of civilians were accidentally killed during this strike, is further proof of how much the Israelis succeeded here. Because if this was a scenario in which Israel did not have the international legitimacy to carry out this raid on Rafiah, the result of this strike killing a significant number of Palestinian civilians, albeit by accident, could have led to the sort of massive international pressure that would have forced Israel out of Rafiah. But again, what we largely saw here was, despite the comments by many foreign ministers throughout the globe talking about the need to take further caution about Palestinian civilians and all the classic diplomatic niceties that we see here and there, by and large, the incident happened and ended, and the world moved on to the next headline. And I think that when it comes to Israel fighting the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think that's really the best you can ask for, especially when you're fighting against a ongoing insurgency in the Gaza Strip, where you're never going to have the upper hand when it comes to creating the sort of public image diplomatic support that you're trying to create. And I think that's a success, especially when you look at it from Israel's perspective. I want to go over some of the comments.
Let's jump into these comments,
We're going to go back to Farida, who I have to say, despite Farida just ripping us to pieces over here.
She's a fan.
She is taking out the time to read our
articles. She's probably our number one follower.
She's our number one follower. You go, Farida. Just keep going at it with your comments. I will say that Farida's comment, in my opinion, is one of the few comments that I got that I would say is arguably anti-Semitic. I'm the last guy that pulls out the anti-Semitic card in order to delegitimize opinions that are different from me. I think that's an unfair thing to do in order to kind of combat your critics. I think that much of the comments that I got, unlike Dillon, who got a lot of pro-Israel comments, I got a lot of anti-Israel comments, and I think that all the criticism is fair and should be discussed. This is one specific comment that I got from good old Farida that I think is arguably anti-Semitic. I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then we can talk about it. Farida says, your first paragraph, Israeli army is a ragtag bunch ranging from pimply New York kids to butchers and bakers. Well equipped, certainly, but by Mr. Chump, but extraordinarily capable? No, sir. No, sirree. It's devoid of craft of war, defunct in morality, department, and unholy in its brutality. So I want to focus on the second sentence here, which I thought was mildly anti-Semitic or implied anti-Semitic. Israeli army is a ragtag bunch ranging from pimply New York kids to butchers and bakers. I myself happen to be from New York, so good job.
I felt like I could feel that stab coming at you. Yeah, that's personal.
That was really,
New York pimple kids deserve respect too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not a pimpy New Yorker. I'm definitely on the opposite side of the New York spectrum when it comes to that sort of stuff, and definitely not a butcher and a baker.
You're also not pimply. You have great skin.
Yeah, and I'm also a vegetarian, so definitely not a baker. So
that's true.
But definitely not a butcher.
Yeah.
I think this comment, especially at least in an American context, I don't know if Farida is from the United States, but at least within the United States, there is code-worded use of certain terms to refer to Jews. And, one of the many code words that are used to refer to Jews, just like there's certain code words that are used to refer to African Americans or to Hispanic Americans or to certain groups. One of the code words that's commonly used is the New York kids or the New Yorkers. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I read this and it was like one of the first comments that I read that I felt my body cringe up a little bit. I was like,
interesting.
What's how did I get to this point? And I see that not only did Farida make a comment that, in my opinion, is anti-Semitic, referring to us New York kids, aka us Jews, being a bunch of butchers and bakers, but I see in addition to that, and I just accidentally liked her comment. That's unfortunate. I say in addition to that she got 269.
Now it was 268, and then you liked it, not
and then I
269.
liked it. Now 269 claps. I think there's no way to unclap on me.
No, you can't. Once it's
unclap.
clapped, it's there forever.
God
You
damn
can
it.
reply and be like, I'm sorry, Frida, I did not mean to like this.
So I will say to Farida on this podcast, you were accidentally clapped, but I guess that this is what you deserve for your intense reading of all our articles.
True.
What do you think? Do you think that...
Look, I get what you're saying. I think the New York kids, like pimply New York kids, it almost be like saying, if you were speaking about African Americans, you say something like, I don't know, thuggish New York kids or New York thugs kind of thing. It would very much translate the same way. I don't know, me personally, like, I don't take it as anti-Semitic even, just because it's so clear that Farida is among the group of people who just view Israel in the worst possible light imaginable, as just the worst actor, as literally the embodiment of, like many within the Arab world refer to it as just the little Satan, right? So no matter what Israel does or anyone who supports it, they are inherently evil. You don't get called the little Satan because you're just misguided.
I gotta push back on you a little bit over
No,
there.
please,
because,
go ahead.
I think that, and one of the things I really appreciate about you, Dillon, is that you hold up a mirror to Israel and you say, we as Israelis have to hold ourselves up to a moral standard that is higher than what is necessarily expected by the average nation, because you have a clear moral compass that you believe that we need to have, and I really appreciate that about you. But I'm going to push back on you, because I also think that we're looking at other countries or other groups of people, and morality should be equal for all of us. It shouldn't just be something for the Israelis. It shouldn't be a double standard just for us. I think that you're kind of being very tough on the Israelis and the comments that you've been making, but on the Palestinians and their supporters, kind of giving them a free pass.
No, not at all. I'm not even... my point, what I'm saying is that I look at her as so unserious that it's not even worth my consideration. It's not even worth my time to be offended. Like, if you're part of the people who are essentially, I would consider you within the realm of conspiracy theorists, that you just view Israel as the little Satan and just in purely evil, it's hard for me to take your opinion seriously, because it's devoid of any nuance, education, or understanding. So when she says, like, pimply New York kids, whatever, I don't think she means it as, like, in an anti-Semitic slur, even though it kind of comes off in that way. I don't think she means in that sense. I just think she means it as, like, she's just trying to be insulting and degrading to the IDF, because that's just how she sees them. And if that's how you see the IDF, I mean, okay. Like, I don't know what world you live in exactly, but, I'm not going to... To me, it's just so ridiculous that it's not even worthy of my...
Fair enough, my friend.
My emotional response.
Fair enough. I want to jump to another comment that I got over here, which kind of affected me emotionally in a different way. Who is the commenter over here? I'm going to do my best not to accidentally like you, because you hurt my feelings. Ken Hughes hurt my feelings a little bit.
Okay.
Wrote to me, last night, the Israeli military carried out a massacre in Rafiah. They bombed displaced families huddled in tents, killing over 45 people. Fuck you and your vision of a successful IDF slaughter campaign. Now, if he had ended his comment at 45 people and it just read, last night the Israeli military carried out a massacre in Rafiah, they bombed displaced families huddled in tents, killing over 45 people, I think that would be one thing. And it kind of refers to the comments that I discussed earlier, where a lot of the comments of pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel activists were very much focused on trying to, prove me wrong or reconfigure their analysis of the situation in a way that was different from mine, and I think that's fair to discuss. But then he ends it over here with, fuck you and your vision of a successful IDF slaughter campaign, which I have to say, at least me personally, I don't find myself in too many experiences in my day-to-day life where people walk out to me and like, fuck you.
Fuck you.
It doesn't happen to me all that often.
That's the beauty of the internet. It happens all the time.
It happens all the time on the internet. So at least for me, most of life ought to be, and at least in our case, it's not on the internet. We live normal day-to-day lives where we walk around and see people and have discussions outside of Mediumverse. And then all of a sudden I come across Ken Hughes, who writes to me, "Fuck you and your vision of a successful IDF slaughter campaign." I have to say, this was not only an unprofessional comment and an offensive comment, it's also a comment that kind of made me take a step back and say, what the hell is going on here in this Mediumverse?
Oh, you're looking at the sort of like toxicity of Medium?
Yeah, the toxicity of the how do you say that word?
Toxicity.
Toxicity.
It's a good internet word because you see
alongside
people.
The other word that we recently learned, I forgot which word that was.
Utopianly.
We
Yeah. This comment was very non-utopianly, if you ask me. Look, I get what you're saying. Like, it's annoying. I don't know. I guess I've been writing on Medium for a while, so I'm kind of used to these comments. Like, to me, it's whatever. It's not even like I don't think you responded to this one, did you?
I didn't respond to any of the comments except to Farida that I did accidentally like her.
You gave her a like. It's your first.
Like her comment, but nobody I responded to. Not because I don't care enough to respond, but I'm just very deep in wedding planning mode. And
right. Yeah. It's taking over your life.
Yeah, and if my bride-to-be saw that I was spending all my free time responding comment, I think that the wedding would probably not take place on the day that it's planned to be taking place.
Well, look, this is the thing about people in the comment, right? Because at the end of the day, that's why most people don't write on the internet and don't post things on the internet, because you expose yourself to so much potential criticism. And people just being mean, and especially like the more popular you get, the more you reveal about yourself, the more people can use it against you, kind of thing. So it's very, par for the course, unfortunately, on the internet. It's just kind of the way it is. This is why I tend to stick to the whole kill 'em with kindness thing.
Yeah.
Not only because I think it's the most effective way to engage with people, but I'm just very against this type of internet toxicity. I think it's very unutopianly, and I try and just change the nature of the conversation to make it more utopianly.
Good for you, Dillon.
Thank you.
Jennifer Burkett, who wrote to me, blah blah blah, yada yada yada. The Palestinians are. She
starts with your article is disgusting. I think
the article is disgusting. The Palestinians are put in position X by the Israelis who do A, B, and C, and then she ends it with, your wording is heartless and sociopathic.
I got a comment similar to this, actually, because I think you and I, we both do try and be a bit academic in the way we write. I think we both kind of come maybe from more of like I don't come from an academic background. I know you have a master's degree. Obviously, I only have my bachelor's. But when we're doing subjects like these that require a lot of research, I think it's easy to kind of get into academic mode. And yeah, I mean, you and I really aren't writing about personal feelings. We're writing about just our perception of acts on the ground. From what we're trying to, I think, at least trying to make it as, I don't know, I want to say like trying to make it as objective as possible, while also acknowledging our own biases, of course. But people take that very badly when they see people just sort of, they see you writing in this way, they take it as like, oh, you just don't care. It comes off as uncaring, especially to a lot of people who do feel very passionate one way or another about this issue, which is an extremely emotional issue.
Yeah, and I think that also connects to Kathy K's comment, who wrote to me, you have a black and dirty soul. Which I have to say, that's the first time that the color of my soul has been called into question.
But the dirtiness, agreed. Kathy, nailed Michael on that one.
Black and dirty soul, that was a rough one. And then there was another comment that I got, which we referenced earlier in this episode, where Greg Dempster, MFA, keep in mind the title, Greg Dempster, MFA.
What is MFA?
MFA, I believe he's referring to a degree that he got.
Right, is it Master of Finance?
Master of Finance. master of something. He's the master of something. Unclear exactly of what. But Greg Dempster, MFA, remember, he has his MFA, do not forget, dear listeners, writes to me, I know you weren't thinking of this, but the day may come before too long where you are accused publicly in a court of law of some crime or the other, whether you are guilty or not. Do you really want the rest of the world to assume you are guilty just because it appears in print? While at first laughable, the obvious hypocrisy has become merely irritating. Now, I read this, and I said to myself, first of all, what's your angle here, Greg Dempster, MFA? And two, I remembered thinking to myself, how did I get to this point where, upon writing in what I believe to be a largely objective analysis of Israel's raid in Rafiah, I'm being informed that I'm likely going to be tried for war crimes?
Just because, I think this is for a lot of people when they see the whole. Look, if you subscribe to some of the anti-Israeli news, like I subscribe to Breaking Points. I don't know if you know who they are. They're incredibly anti-Israel. They have fantastic reporting. Don't get me wrong, but they're incredibly anti-Israel. And if you follow news story after news story after news story after news story that they are putting out every day, then it in your mind you start to perceive not just like the Israeli government, but also the Israeli people and the Israeli soldiers as being essential criminals. And for someone I think like Greg Dempster, who's probably within...
Greg Dempster, MFA, do not forget.
My apologies, Greg Dempster, MFA. If you're someone like this gentleman who probably falls on some of these circles, I think it's easy to sort of get into this, again, this very one-sided notion, devoid of nuance, devoid of to kind of get into this emotional spiral where you start to you're hoping for what you perceive as justice to occur. And I think for someone like Greg Dempster MFA, he really does believe that the IDF is committing genocide and that Israeli soldiers are participating in genocide, and that anyone who is aligned with Israel in some way or another deserves to be tried and convicted in some sort of international tribunal. That's probably where he's expressing that frustration in the best way he can, which is commenting on your post.
And I think the last topic I want to touch on before we close up today's episode was left by Raif Hijab, who says the following: unbelievable! Exclamation point. As of this writing, 637 readers have approved the screed from IDF operative Michael Harris. In the face of accusations from around the world that Israel is committing a genocide, we are treated to a congratulatory write-up rationalizing still more killing and destruction. The response from the Israel right or wrong chorus is stunning. So I'm gonna put aside the grammatical mistakes in this comment. I'm going to refer mainly to the 637 readers that he's talking about. By the way, it's not 637 readers, it's 637 claps. A reader on Medium can leave more claps.
You can leave up to 50 claps.
But I do appreciate the...
We wish it was 637. Yeah. That would be awesome.
I do appreciate the desire to say it was 637 readers. It was 637 claps that I got. It moved up to 654 as of this podcast. But, he kind of makes me think about an interesting point that you discussed earlier, where you wrote an article that wasn't anti-Israel, but was critical of Israel from a certain angle. And I wrote an article that was not, intended to be pro-Israel propaganda, but did have more of a pro-Israel angle. And the comments that we both got was very much from the other side, meaning you inspired a lot of this pro-Israel crowd to come out and talk with you and leave comments. And at least for me, I got a lot of the anti-Israel crowd. Mm-hmm. But what was interesting is that the people who did clap, I got 48 people who clapped these 654 claps for me. Almost none of them commented. Almost all of them clapped and moved on.
Yeah, because I think that the clap is just sort of like I agree. That's a boring comment. It's just much you to just clap, 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 clap. See you later. But yeah, as opposed to someone who doesn't want to clap and who disagrees so vehemently that they want to, because when you leave your comment, sometimes a lot of people do before they even read an article is they'll just read the comments, and if they see all this disagreement, that might dissuade them from reading that comment. It's the closest, because you can't do like a thumbs down or anything on Medium. So the closest you can do to leaving a negative review is just leaving these negative comments as a way to dissuade people of reading. The irony, of course, is that on Medium, the more claps and comments you get, the more your story is boosted in the algorithm, the more people will see it and read it. So people who leave negative comments are really just inviting more people to read your article, and as we all know as well, the more controversial it becomes, the more interesting it becomes, and the higher chance of it actually exploding in popularity it gets. So somebody like, what was the gentleman's name? Raif?
I already forgot. It was Raif something.
Raif. So a gentleman like Raif leaving that comment actually brings you closer to the 637 as if he had just kind of like clicked out and walked away.
Right. Yeah.
I think, I don't know, I think that there's a larger conversation we can have here, obviously, that's very, divorced from our usual topic about the internet culture and sort of the intensity of it, and I hate to keep using this word, the toxicity of some of it. Look, at the end of the day, you and I both chose to kind of get into a very controversial topic, and it's going to inspire a lot of emotions. And the fact that, kind of as you said, we kind of said in a joking way, but it's true, the fact that what we're writing is at least being taken seriously enough by people to feel that they need to leave a comment is, in a way, flattering. I mean, that's one way for us to kind of look at it, where it's like, wow, they give enough of a crap about what we're saying that they feel like they should leave a comment. And I think that's again, I think that's very flattering, and I don't. I wish, obviously, people were a little bit nicer. I definitely try and be a little bit nicer and complimenting when I'm on the internet, when I'm speaking with people, because I feel like that's just the way you should behave.
You typically don't call people demons. That's
That's
not
don't
your style.
generally call people demons unless they're like dressed as one. But but yeah, I don't tend to do that. But again, like I do think a lot of people look at this war as truly a battle of good and evil from both sides. They truly see this as sort of a fight of the force
Angels and demons.
Of angels and demons. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the deeper you get into this conflict, the more you sort of, I mean, for me at least, I'll speak again. I don't want to speak for other people. I'll speak for myself. The deeper I've gotten in this conflict, the more it's made me realize that what you really end up with are two people fighting an existential war. Two groups of people fighting an existential war. And I've said it many times, I'll say it again. When you're fighting an existential war, nothing is not permissible. Because if you believe that you and your people and everyone you know and love is going to die, what would you not do? You would do something like October 7th. You would do something like dropping 2,000-pound bombs in civilian areas. These are things because you believe that your very existence and your people's way of life is completely at risk. Whether or not both sides are in an existential crisis is a greater conversation. But regardless, I think this is how both sides view it. And it's gone to this point now where both sides have demonized the other so badly as the perpetrators of this that they're willing to do whatever it takes to remove them entirely. Which ironically becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Any final thoughts for the Mediaverse that you wanna
look? As much as we criticize Medium, at the end of the day, I think we both enjoy Medium a lot. Anyone who wants to write on Medium, it's totally free. You can write about whatever you want. There's an audience for it. I think it's great. I love that I can kind of flex these creative muscles a little bit. I know you and I are not exactly number one fans of working day jobs, as many people are, and the fact that we can kind of do this, I think, is amazing. And also as well, if you pay the $5 a month, you actually get paid when people read your stories, which is also super cool. It's kind of cool at the end of the day. Like, what is that? It's like I think you get a discount for the year, $50 for the whole year. I've made that money back in like a week just writing on Medium. It's super cool. Get like a couple $100 a month just spending cash just from doing something I would do for free.
Which I have to say, at least in my case, was pretty ironic because I saw in this recent article that I wrote, What Israel's Successful Rate in Rafiach Taught Us All, that I think I cleared out, not an enormous amount of money, I think like $30, but all that $30 came from the subscriptions of very, very anti-Israel commentators, which I find pretty ironic because these same people were telling me that I'm a fucked up New York pimp / baker / butcher, however you want to call it.
Not pimp.
Pimply baker and or butcher, even though I'm a vegetarian, but we'll put that to the side for now. They're basically giving all their subscription money to me, which I have to say that despite your negative comments, I'm very appreciative of. So thank you very much to Farida and to all of her crew for paying for my next beer.
Thank you all, and thank you for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And this may be something we'll do periodically, just kind of going over comments, especially as we, hopefully, once Michael's married, and hopefully if we're able to not be called up to the front, we can keep producing content and doing what we love, because this is really, to me, far more enjoyable than being in the olive green of the IDF, even though at the end of the day, that's the duty we have and the vow we took. But hopefully we can just keep doing this, because this is awesome.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Take care.